Three. Okay. Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon to people all around the world. As you know by now, I think I'm Fred Plotkin. This is Fred Plotkin on Fridays on IDAGIO Live, where I have as my guest every week someone who I personally find very inspiring. Usually they are great musicians, and today's guest certainly is a great musician. He is Lawrence Brownlee, known to many as Larry Brownlee. Which you prefer being called today?
You can call me Larry, but I'm equally cognizant. I'm aware of the fact that people call me both Larry and Lawrence, so I answer to both equally.
Well, I'm going to say that you're Lawrence on the stage and Larry to your friends. How about that?
Okay, that's good.
Welcome. It is, Larry, great to see you. I'm going to introduce you. I know that many of our listeners know you, but Larry Brownlee is one of the foremost tenors in opera today. He has performed in almost all of the great opera houses of the world. I'm going to ask you if there's any that you've not performed in yet that you'd like to. He is multi-award winning. He won the Metropolitan Opera National Council's auditions in 2001. That's 10,000 people where it gets compressed down to a group of 5. And at that time, they did rankings, and you were ranked number 1 of the 5. They don't do rankings anymore. So in other words, you were the top singer in the new crop in the world. It's like American Idol or whatever you want to pick. And that was a huge achievement, but there have been many more. The Richard Tucker Award, the Marian Anderson Award, both in 2006. And in 2017, and this is a tough one, you were named the top male opera singer in the world at the International Opera Awards, and richly deserved. And that's just the beginning. There's a lot more to Larry Brownlee that we're going to get into today. So, Larry, welcome.
Thank you.
Sure, good to see you as always. I'm going to start with something. Let me start by saying this. When I announced that I was having you on, I had more people write to me from all over the world saying, "Oh, I love Larry Brownlee. I'm so glad you're going to have him on. Not only is he a wonderful singer, but he's a magnificent person." And you're going to have to just deal with that accolade, and you don't have to respond to me. But I I'm in the opera business. I know very few people who is as universally loved as you are. So you must be doing something right. I think it's who you are. I can say that because I know you. But one thing that anyone who knows Larry Brownlee knows is that you were a big lover of sports, and maybe a super big lover of sports.
Yes.
Am I correct to say especially football, or would you add basketball and other sports as well, tennis?
I would have to say that football is in position number 1, but there are other sports. Basketball, I'm a big fan of. Tennis, yes, as you said, I'm a big fan of the sport of tennis. I'm a big fan of Novak Djokovic in tennis.
Tell
And
me why, because so am I. Tell me why.
The reason why I love Novak Djokovic, I love him because I think he has a complete game. And, when there was the dominance and the supremacy of Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal, so many other people tried to crack that, tried to infiltrate that, and no one was successful except for Djokovic. And he has a winning record against both of them. People argue that Roger Federer is the greatest tennis player of all times, and that's up for debate. But when I think about his record and his accolades, much of that was done before Novak Djokovic and even Rafael Nadal came onto the scene. If you think of his Grand Slam titles, I think 12 of his titles are against people who will never even sniff the Hall of Fame. But all of Djokovic's titles are Rafael Nadal, Roger Federer, Andy Murray, and who is one other? I think Andy Murray and one other player, Wawrinka or something like that. So all of the people that he's won Grand Slam finals were people that were arguably considered the best of all time. So I like Novak because I just think he is the great equalizer in that, that argument between who's the greatest of all times. You have to give some credence to the fact that even though he's come on late, he's just 3 away from Federer and 2 away from Nadal. So that's why I love him.
I completely agree with you. And there's one more thing about Novak Djokovic that a lot of people don't know that really puts him high in my estimation. He loves opera.
Yes,
he loves opera.
Yes.
And is open about it. And part of what I wanted to talk to you about is this bridge between our world of opera and the world of sports, which is a lot stronger and can be stronger still. I know many opera singers, opera workers, musicians, conductors who are passionate sports fans. And they bring this passion to it that they bring to their own work. And I find that, well, for example, I won't name him, but one of my very, very favorite singers, he's a grand old man of opera, despises Novak Djokovic. And this man is a great singer, and I hope to have him on this program one day. Absolutely, he's a man of strong opinions and despises Novak Djokovic with all of his might. I'm just not one of those. I tend to agree with you about his merits and his accomplishments. And I add to that fact that he loves opera. Now, my number one beloved sport is baseball.
Okay.
And baseball, to me, I always say it's my other religion. And there has been shown for decades, if even more than a century, a very strong relationship between people who love baseball and people who love opera. And there are many, many reasons for that. One is, frankly, the seasons, at least in New York and elsewhere in the United States, that the New York Met as an opera goes from September to May. And so September is when the Yankees and the Mets are in their championship phase, if they are. And the beginning of the opera season, new beginning, baseball season, is in April, May. And basically, once we can't root for our New York Met opera and other opera companies here, we switch over to baseball. And then we switch back. Many, many opera singers sing the national anthem for their teams. There's a wonderful baritone named Andrew Garland, he's nearly perfect, but he's not, because he loves the Red Sox in Boston. And he sings for them. And, the Red Sox are a good team, but I'm a Yankee fan, so it's an issue. But I knew when I worked at the Metropolitan Opera, I knew many audience members who would come back. This was in the days when you would have a little wire going to your transistor radio, and they'd be watching Gotterdammerung, but listening to the World Series when the Yankees and the Mets were in it. And you would hear a murmur in the audience. A couple of years ago, I was in San Francisco at an opera, and suddenly they flash on the screen, the Giants won the World Series. And the audience cheered in the middle of Manon Lescaut or whatever it was.
Right, exactly.
And they do opera in baseball stadiums in certain places. And the other thing about opera and baseball is that there is a kind of protagonism in baseball that doesn't happen in most other sports. Tennis, yes. Namely, that you have a soloist who might be the batter, and another soloist who might be the pitcher, and then the bass baritone who's the catcher. And everyone has their moment. And the crowd is the chorus, and we focus on the achievement of the soloist, so to speak. And then we move on to someone else. And it's an ongoing narrative. And baseball, unlike most sports, does not have a fixed time. So it's like a Wagner opera. And whereas most team sports have clocks and time, and it's about the movement of a ball across a terrain and getting it over a goal line into a hoop or whatever. And so that's why there's that link, where it's been shown many times that people who love football love ballet for the sheer physical athleticism of that. And that, to me, strikes me as a bit unusual, but they do.
Maybe.
Now, there's another sport that I know you love because, you know, as I said, when I announced that I was going to be talking to you, I got an email from a friend in San Francisco who said, talk to Larry about ping pong, about table tennis. Because apparently you basically got the whole company playing table tennis backstage. What's behind that?
I don't know about that because, you know, when I knew that I was going to San Francisco Opera and I went there to make my debut, I had known that there was actually a tradition of the people in the chorus and the tech guys who played ping pong. And so I went there knowing that there was this great tradition. And so as soon as I got there, I just said, where's the ping pong table? And it turns out by the end of the time that I left, we managed to have a tournament with some of the people from the music staff, some of the technicians, some of the guys from the chorus. And those guys are pretty formidable. You know, we mixed it up pretty nicely. And I think I came in third place out of about third place. And the guy who won, I think it's not Dave didn't win, but there was a guy from Lights. I think Mike was the guy who won the tournament. Yes, and sir. Mike was just slightly better than the rest of us, but we had fun. John Churchwell, who's a good friend of mine and a pianist, he's a very good player, and he hadn't played that much leading up to that point, but we had some knockout, drag down battles, and it was just fun for me. And so I love the sport of ping pong. And when I get the chance to play it, that's usually mixed into what I do in some of these other cities as well. Munich, New York, Chicago, Houston. I played ping pong in all these cities.
Well, this brings up a couple of things. One is with ping pong, many sports, but certainly tennis and ping pong, this dialogue, this interaction, this focus. Mm-hmm. Yeah. How does that transfer into singing a duet? In terms of listening and using your senses, I mean that very seriously.
You absolutely do, because you have to. One of my favorite stage directors, his name is Moysha. I don't know if you know that name. He and his partner Patrice, they are some of the most thorough stage directors I've ever worked with before. And I remember, Moysha told me that one of the most important things about being on stage from an acting standpoint is listening. And I think that carries over into ping pong. You have to listen, you have to watch, you have to be cognizant of what your opponent or sometimes, your colleague is doing. And so there's a certain awareness that I think plays into how you read them, how you watch. With ping pong, a lot of times you have to watch how the wrist goes, because you can understand if it's a backspin or if it's a side spin or something else. And I think being on stage and responding to someone in the moment is where you begin to see things that are special in opera, because everything's not going to be the same every night, and it shouldn't be. But I think you can have this dialogue when you're really aware. The awareness that I think you get from a sport like ping pong or some of these other sports is similar to the awareness and listening and really being tuned in and channeling what one of your colleagues is saying on stage.
Well, you are a bel canto specialist. We're going to get into that more later, but you use the term backspin and side spin.
Yes.
And I think that there is an application. I don't think I'm forcing the metaphor here in bel canto, in that the voice, and that's like Leontine Price saying the voice, meaning her voice, but I mean the voice, yours and your partner on stage, whether it's a woman, a man, whatever. In bel canto, the voice goes to certain places either because of a technical issue, the mood of the singer. Someone like this who I adore, who you know and have worked with, and I imagine adores, Joyce DiDonato, who will go where her mood and where her heart takes her in a moment. And that's very exciting because it's not a repeat of the previous performance. It's very in the moment. Have you ever played ping pong with Joyce DiDonato? I think we could raise money for a good cause.
I don't think Joyce is, I think she does like yoga and some of these things like that, but I don't think she's into sports per se. She is a fan of sports. Of course, she's a fan of her Kansas City Royals and the Kansas City Chiefs. But Joyce loves supporting sports, but I don't know if she'd want to play ping pong. I take her up on the challenge though.
Okay. So that's the one question regarding ping pong. The other is you raise an important point that I don't think the non-performing world, or in my case, the non-working in opera world, fully understands, is that we who work in opera, and I call it planet opera, tend to have to travel a lot. Unless you're a member of an orchestra or chorus that's resident in a theater, a huge component of this life is travel. And frankly, in our current pandemic moment, we're doing very little of that. But before that, I know, Larry, that you were on the road constantly, and you have a family, you have a wife and 2 children, and you nonetheless make a very important career artistically as well as professionally. And I would add as well as personally, because that's what I meant before when I said that you are very loved in all the theaters and places where you go. And the point I'm getting to is that in opera, people who travel about, whether it's to work on a production or whether to jump into an existing production to sing 3 performances of a role and then move on, or sometimes as a last minute replacement, have to create, if not quite family elsewhere, but we have people elsewhere. Because there's the biological family, and then there's the so-called logical family that happen where you are when you are, because your wife and kids cannot always travel with you. So
that's correct.
Therefore, you create and live as part of communities elsewhere. And part of that glue seems to be ping pong, sports, dinners. You're younger, but I remember the period when there were phone calls were super expensive, and there were fax machines. And I'm a very good friend of Marilyn Horne, and she was once in Paris. She's a night owl. I'm a night owl. And we were faxing for hours. This is before email, and just faxing back and forth between my home and her hotel. To my knowledge, the first singer to adopt digital and use email and websites and so on was the soprano Jane England. And she evangelized about that to all the people in the business because, number one, most important, you save your voice. That, by the way, is why I didn't call and speak to Marilyn Horne, not just the cost of phone calls. She didn't want to talk between performances. Singers often stay in their apartments or their hotel rooms. They don't talk. They used to get room service. Things have changed in the world in which they stay less in hotels and more in rented apartments or flats. Airbnbs. And therefore, the community of opera singers of your generation and the next one tend to be sociable and familial in different ways than the past.
Absolutely.
Can you address your experience with older opera people and your generation than younger people, how that happens in the life of theaters on the road?
Well, for me, all the things you said is, absolutely true as far as like me doing things and me trying to be involved in things. In addition to the sports, in addition to the ping pong, one of my great loves, and people know about this, is that I'm very, very into salsa dancing. I love salsa dancing so much. And even sometimes between performances, if I have 4 or 5 days, I'll go to a 3-day salsa festival and dance for probably 20 hours or maybe even more than that. I remember going to Berlin when I had about 5 days off in between shows last year, 2019, and there was a Berlin salsa marathon that one of my good longtime friends named Suzanne put together when I went to Berlin to sing at Berlin State Opera in 2006. We became friends since then. And, so that's 14 years later. So she arranged this salsa congress, and all I did from sun up to sundown, and even more than that, was dance salsa with people who were as crazy about salsa as I am. So I say that to say that, I want to have a life that is fulfilled. It's difficult to be home away from home all the time. And so I tell people all the time, especially young singers who don't know anything about this business and they think it's all glamour. I tell them that it can be extremely lonely. So what you have to do is to venture out, and you have to make friends, and you have to try to make being on the road like being at home. So for me now, returning to Paris, returning to Berlin, returning to Zurich, returning to New York City, I already have a built-in network of people that I can reach out to that are not in the opera business. We do, as you said, sometimes make the opera colleagues our extended family or our logical family at that time. And 3 or 4 of those nights of the week we'll go out or we'll meet at a coffee shop to give ourselves some type of, connection to someone, so we don't feel alone. And yes, many of the older singers did stay in the hotels and they did protect their voices and did do all these things. But I think the younger generation, we're more a part. We realize that we're a part of this world. We're tapped into it, and we want to be fun and vibrant. And we understand that the day of the diva in the way that you have to be really disconnected from society, because I think that's also a part of it as well. Social media today gives you a certain connectivity to the artist of today in a way that it didn't in the past. And so being this kind of enigmatic persona that was really kind of like set apart, that's not so much what we deal with today. If you go to Instagram right now, you'll see many of my colleagues are sharing videos of their own every day about what they're cooking, them working out, something they did fun today, just whatever. And so it's a different access point or accessibility to the artist of today. So I'm a part of that younger generation, and I definitely know how to draw the parameters and say if someone tries to get too close. But I do feel like I am a citizen of this world that other people can have some, connection to.
There are certain singers and also other people in the arts, but I'll focus on opera singers, who really do a great job on social media.
Mm-hmm.
I think the first one, although she seems to have moved away from it, is the American soprano Christine Brewer, who really was kind of like the den mother for opera singers and the arts, and basically was available to them to share experience and lend a shoulder and so on. Christine Goerke, who I had here on May 1st, is a wonderful leader on social media, and again knows where to draw the line, and does not hesitate to state her political and personal and social, which is great. Samuel Ramey stakes out a place on his own as a guy. I love him.
I love Sam.
I do too.
He does not. He's parse words, does he? He's like.
He does not
mince words.
What he thinks.
Yeah, he's just
And Joyce DiDonato is another, although she uses it for, I would call it guidance and motivation and inspiration. What you do, because I rank you with those people in this regard, but you have staked out a different kind of terrain that I really admire you for. It's leadership. Christine Goerke does that somewhat, but more in a very natural, maternal way. With you, I find, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, a conscious sense of wanting to provide leadership guidance, thought, motivation. You initiate an issue on social media and allow people to debate. I did that once on an issue, and a neighbor and friend of mine, quote, unfriended me on Facebook and asked her why. She said, because you didn't engage in the discussion. And my feeling is that sometimes we just need to formulate an idea without staking our own position, to let people read dialogue, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it should we use microphones in opera, whether the Pittsburgh Steelers are really better than the Cleveland Browns. Pick the topic. Pick the topic. But Larry, is this you by nature, or did you really set out to do this leadership goal? And motivation in an area where you can have impact well beyond the opera stage?
You know, I went to a school that was extremely conservative. My college was called Anderson University, extremely conservative. And there were people who had such strong viewpoints about religion, about government, about just society in itself. Uh, I am an artist in the operatic field, and I tend to find that that is completely opposite to what the schooling situation I had. And other things in my life, other periods in my life, of course, being a traveler and having seen 47 countries thus far in my life, being 47 years old and having seen that many countries, I consider myself a citizen of the world. And I have collected, if you will, friends from all over the world. And so I have people from differing viewpoints. And so I always try to bring these people together, because we find ourselves usually associating with people that share the same, pretty much the same viewpoints as us, and we never get outside of that. So what I've done on social media, on Facebook and other platforms, is actually put questions for people to have dialogue. Because if your viewpoints are never challenged, I don't think that's good. I think complacency is the death of art, and it's the death of many other things. And so I think you should be challenged. I think what can happen by talking to someone who's completely different than you is for you to go back and even fortify or strengthen your beliefs. It'll cause you or move you to go back and study. It'll make you read. It'll make you read up to be able to better express what you think, as far as like some of these different various subjects. But it may actually also cause you to soften, or cause you to realize that there's a different perspective. If you, there's no way I can make a statement about someone who is different than myself if they're really a friend, because I will know in a different way, rather than generalizing, which I think a lot of people often do. I think it causes you to be a listener sometimes. A lot of people, they write me private messages and say, oh my gosh, I read 50 different comments, or I was on your page reading all these things, and they don't necessarily get in. Or sometimes people will say, I don't normally do this, but I want to go ahead and get into the discussion. So we didn't have a debates team in my high school, but I probably would have been on it. I'm one of 6 kids. I've had to get myself out of situations with my sisters, but I've had the training to be able to try to express myself in a way that people can understand. But I think anytime you talk to someone or try to express something, there has to be a sense of at least empathy and compassion, towards their viewpoint as well. And so that's what I try to provide. I think Charles Barkley said, he never thought of himself being a role model. You talked about leadership, and I know a lot of young singers, not just Black, do look up to me, because I've been fortunate to have some success in this business. But I use my platform to try to speak up about certain issues, to try to give some visibility to certain things that are on my heart, and so people can then just jump in and discuss these issues.
And you can answer this to the degree that you wish or don't wish to answer. You and I have a mutual friend who I think is an outstanding artist, who early on in the social media period stated things online intelligently. He's very intelligent. Emotionally, he's a very feeling person. And I know that it cost him work.
Mm-hmm.
I just know that. Mm-hmm. And I, in the most gentle way, tried to say to him, I agree with you on your ideas. I genuinely do, sir. But I think you need to pull back just a little bit, because also, frankly, he spoke about medical things, about his voice, his lungs, his nose, whatever. And I just felt that seeing that cost him work, and he's a marvelous, marvelous artist. Mm-hmm. And he did pull back somewhat, and then suddenly he started getting a lot more work, which he richly deserves. Mm-hmm. social media can cut many ways. And one of them is, frankly, if you, let's say politically, you don't, I know you do not broadcast, I have a cold on social media. But if you say something that a manager of an opera company may not agree with, or may not want someone using controversial not language, but ideas. Samuel Ramey is at the point in his career where he doesn't care. He can do whatever he wants. But you are actively involved in the world and seeking work and receiving work. But I know, because I've been both in the production side and the management side, that there are people who say, well, we can use someone else for whatever it is that the person said or did or put wrong or whatever. We know about these issues. It could be racial, it could be sexual, it could be any number of things. And therefore, do you, in writing and posting leadership ideas, bring this into your thinking, or does it not really matter? Tell me your thought process.
It does matter, and I think you have to be intelligent. I think you have to put thought in it. One thing that I will do on my page, because I have often dissenting viewpoints, people who are not necessarily of the same thinking, is I always try to encourage respectability. I always say, you know, you can have your opinions, but make sure that you keep it clean on my page. And so if people understand that I'm trying to just have dialogue, and as you said, I don't necessarily jump in there. If someone asks me directly what I think about it, you know, I'll go and give my viewpoint, but it's always with an air of respectability for yours as well. And I always say that if you have something, we don't have to be warring. We just have different ideologies, and this is a place to just discuss, bring it into the public, viewpoint, or make it visible to the public. And so that doesn't have to be problematic. But I understand that everybody's watching, the world is watching, and so you have to make sure that you keep respectability as a part of it. I mean, just some of the recent things that have been happening. Social media is in a second, it's the shot, or it's the incident that happens around the world. Some of these social things that have happened recently, it's broadcast instantly around the world. The same thing is true in our business. A performance goes well, you know about it in 10 seconds. And that's something that is relived over and over and over and over again. So you just have to be aware that you have a very big footprint on the world with what you put on social media. So yes, that goes into play in how I post things, but not that I'm a centrist, because I definitely have my political viewpoints and my viewpoints on other things, but I always try to present it in a way that promotes dialogue, that someone from the other side is willing to engage. Because if I put it just, I hate this, hate this, hate this, hate this, then it's not going to be the type of engagement I want. And so, yeah, I do have some thought, in how I post my things on social media.
There's a course / masterclass that I teach called Media, Social Media, and the Artist, the Performing Artist. I taught at Juilliard, I've taught it for the Martina Arroyo Foundation, I've taught it at Cincinnati College of Music and other places. And it's about the fact that you said you're 47. People who are half your age tend to not have that same filter, whether it's an issue of not having enough life experience, or the fact that their first place where they lived really was on social media, and they don't know what to say, what not to say, what to present and not to present. And the first question I always ask my class is, name different kinds of media, because media is a very loaded word. And the very young artists in their 20s will say, well, there is Instagram and there's IDAGIO. Now we have, thank goodness. And their older ones will say there's Facebook and Twitter and things like that. And I say, well, more. And they say, well, there's TV. They don't, no one in my experience of teaching this class has ever said books.
Yeah.
And the printed word is still incredibly powerful. The difference is that a book or a magazine or a newspaper article usually brings a degree of professionalism to it and editorial oversight that is missing from people who post on social media. And
Absolutely.
a lot of the very young people feel they sort of have to share and tell everything. And you and I were talking about artists of the quote past, who are the people I often worked with, who were they were a bit distant, they were a bit removed, they were mythical in their way, because that lent to their performances on the stage. I believe that people should be out and open about who and what they are to the degree that they want to be. And there's a huge difference between being private and being secretive. And I found that many of the older artists were private. I had the great honor to work a lot with Joan Sutherland, who,
Wow.
the Titan of bel canto. And she was a wonderful woman and very funny and a super colleague, but she was also very private and knew where to draw the line, not because she was secretive, but just because what the Italians call the vita interiore, the inner life, helps nourish the artistry. And many artists, Pavarotti was that way, and he was such an outgoing man, but he kept that vita interiore. And I think there's something to be said for that, and something I try to teach to very young artists, because save some of it for the stage, basically, is what I mean. I know now that, because you're 47, as you told us, that many younger artists turn to you for not just leadership, but for advice and so on. What do you advise them in terms of pursuing an opera career? Difficult at any time, much harder now in a time of a pandemic. Although there are glimmerings in Europe of life coming to. The Opera House in Valencia just announced a very interesting season that starts with a couple of works with a lot of social distancing in the opera itself. And then by the end of the season, they look like they're doing more collaborative things like Falstaff, where people have to interact. What do you tell young artists when they seek advice from you?
Well, there's a lot of things I tell them. I say the biggest thing I tell them is to be a true student of, the art form, and be a student means that you listen and you learn. And as you were talking about, a lot of the younger kids who use social media as their soapbox, an opportunity to let everybody have it, or let them know how they feel, or feel like they have a mouthpiece that they can, like just say any idea that comes to their mind. It's a hashtag, and we have so many different ways to do it. It's super direct, but it doesn't have to be a post as much as it is just a story, or just a screenshot that you just put a hashtag of something that you disapprove of or you like. And so I tell them to be filters. Filters means that let the information come out, and you can disseminate, you can take in rather what it is you want to keep, and let the rest go out. But don't be something that blocks information from coming in, because I don't think that's helpful. And that's something my dad told me a long time ago. He said, whatever you don't want of the information that's coming in, let it go out, but at least let it pass through, because you can find value in a lot of the things that other people say. I tell them to be intentional in their work. I tell them to be deliberate in their studies. I tell them to make sure that they are always constantly making investments into their career. You and I, we share the language of Italian, and you speak it like a native Italian speaker. And I speak it at a pretty high level myself, but it's one of those things that I said was an investment in myself, in my career. As a Black man who went to Milan La Scala in 2002 to make my debut there, I didn't speak Italian, but I had a conductor who since then has become a very, very dear friend of mine, who told me that that's something that I need to have. And so pursuing that and working on that was one of the things that has enhanced my career. It wasn't a stumbling block. And it caused me to be able to work in Italy in a completely Italian cast and never miss a beat. even when going out socially, we can talk about things from politics to religion and other things as well, social issues. And so that's one thing that I feel like I have. And so based upon doing that, I've tried to do that the same way with French and German. I haven't quite yet got to the level of those to Italian, but it's something that I aspire to have, especially by the time I end my career, is to be fully fluent in all three of those languages, English included. That's why I said four. So, but more than anything, I tell the younger students that it's about the work you do, and not waiting for somebody to hand you or to lay in your lap this international career, because the person that is most responsible for your success is you. And I think Stephen Lord said this, a good friend, a dear friend of mine and mentor, he said a long time ago, is that, a lot of people want to be handed this, but you have to do all the work. You have to do all the work. And so I try to show them by example, when they see me working, when they see me pursuing things, that's the way that's the reason why I've seen some success. And so I try to make sure that they realize they have the biggest hand or biggest part in their success.
Just to pick up on this idea of speaking Italian, I'm 64, just to give a context of age. And I began working in opera companies when I was 16 at the Lyric Opera of Chicago. And Bruno Bartoletti was there at Artist Kranick, and it's an American company, obviously, but with a strong connection to Italy historically and so forth. And I moved to Italy when I was 18 to enroll at the University of Bologna's conservatory, which is where Rossini studied, your pal Rossini, Mozart, and a lot of great people. And I felt it was important to study where they studied, number one. But number two, fluency was required in Italian, not just because of the art form itself, but because at that time it was the common working language in opera houses. Not English or not German in the German country. But if I would work at the Royal Opera House in London, yes, English would be the first language. But if people didn't speak English, they all had to speak Italian.
Yeah.
If they were Bulgarian or Korean or American, it didn't matter. They all had to speak Italian. So it was necessary at that time that we all were fluent in Italian in addition to our native language. Do you dance salsa in Spanish, by the way?
Well, I dance salsa and we don't use any words, but I actually do know a lot of the lyrics of the song, because I actually became, before my career really took off, I actually was a salsa DJ. So I have a lot of the CDs that I have over there. I don't know if I can show you. Those are like Latin salsa. And so that's not even half of it. I have a ton. And then I have a hard drive that's spilling over with salsa music. But yeah, so it's good. It's important for you to be able to have this fluency and a command of the language. And you're right. Italian is the default language. If it's not English somewhere now, I think it's become English because I think the internet has helped that. And I think other things with international business and stuff has helped it. But for me, it is very, very common that if it's not English, it's Italian. And so you're left out to dry if you don't have that. And many people from some of these Eastern European places don't even have English. So it is Italian that we use.
I remember my first visit to Berlin, which was the late 70s. I was a teenager, just 20. I went to whatever opera was on, and there was Tosca and Lohengrin, and names I knew. But then there was an opera by Verdi called Der Macht des Schicksals, and I had no idea what that was. And I bought a ticket. It was La Forza del Destino, but it was done in German, which was very jarring to my ear, because at that time, many countries, including Germany, less in the big cities like Berlin and Munich, but in the regional towns, I once saw Carmen in German, for example.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my.
These
Oh,
are instead of La Fleur.
How was that? How was that?
Well, actually, my recording that I heard of Carmen was Christa Ludwig in German when I was a little kid.
My.
So to me, Carmen was a German language opera. It was not. I later came to know it in French.
Oh my gosh.
But that was sort of a surprise to me. Back to leadership, because it's something you're really good at and special at. You have become a leader in supporting, guiding, motivating. I want you to tell me the proper term. I don't want to say African American because many people of color are not American.
Mm-hmm.
There are Black
Yeah.
Canadian artists and Jamaican and British and so on.
Mm-hmm.
We had a lovely woman, Elizabeth Llewellyn, sing Bess and Porgy and Bess at the Met, and she's British. So I
Mm-hmm.
can't
Yeah.
say African American. What term would you prefer I use?
A lot of people say people of African descent.
Okay.
You know, people will say who the origin, you know, coming from Africa is clear that, you know, it's impossible. There's a mixture of people from all over the place. But obviously, when you have the, you know, the darker skin that comes from Africa, we say people of African descent. And so, you know, Facebook only allows you to have 5,000 friends. And I remember early on when I was in Facebook that I started getting a lot of requests from people in Africa and South Africa and Nigeria and a lot of the English people who sing opera that are people of African descent. And, you know, I realized that there is a community that looks to not only myself, but because I'm a part of the younger generation, not now moving into like the middle generation, you know, with my age group.
You're august, Larry.
You know, a lot of these people now, you know, I've been told by many people that I've inspired them and I caused them to believe that they, you know, could do this. And so I always feel like it's important to pay it forward and to be accessible. And I think, you know, some of the artists that were right above me as far as like the generational difference between the two levels, I guess you can say, I didn't see that there was a real desire to help the younger ones. And so I've always vowed that I would not be that way. I vowed that I would be different than that. And I think it's important to try to do that because paying it forward is bigger for me in the sense of trying to, even my legacy, I think the more people I help will ensure that what people will say when I'm gone, it will be a lot more things to say about me as not just the artist, but the person. Because I think one light illuminates other lights and makes the wattage brighter. And so that's what I want to try to do. And it's not for me to gain anything, but it's just to be a resource for them and a sense of help so they can be empowered and really be encouraged to pursue their careers.
Am I correct that on July 26th, you have a virtual concert coming up? What's involved in that?
So I will be doing, the plan right now is to be, it'll be a virtual concert where I will be in Chicago with Lyric Opera Chicago. This is one of the companies that I work with as somewhat of a community ambassador. And so I will be working with their Young Artist Program and my dear friend Craig Terry, and we will present music, and we are entirely, with the exception of Craig, we're African American or of African descent, and so we will present numerous things. We will present some spirituals, some songs by African American composers, and so a varied program. And so this is to be sent out to celebrate Black voices, to talk about the things that are important to us, the things that are on our heart. And so Craig Terry and I have come up with a really fantastic program, and I hope people will appreciate that.
You, because of your position in the business, are able to have operas written for you and song cycles written for you. I've had the great pleasure of attending your performances in Philadelphia, New York. You were in an opera called Yardbird by Daniel Schneider. Is that his name?
Schneider, yes.
Schneider, okay.
Yes.
And it's about the trumpeter Charlie Parker.
The saxophonist.
Yes, I'm sorry. You played the trumpet, saxophone. What was the inspiration for creating that? And it was a wonderful opera that sort of merged musically opera and jazz, which is hard to do.
Yes. So it came as a result of my relationship with Opera Philadelphia. As I spoke before about going to La Scala and singing many years ago, the person who took me to do that role was a guy by the name of Corrado Ravaris, who is the music director of Opera Philadelphia. And so he and I have gone on to become very dear friends. And it was he that told me and stressed to me how important it was for me to learn Italian. So I give him credit for that as well. And so working with Opera Philadelphia, they've always wanted to support my talent. And so they knew of this Daniel Schneider, who's also, you know, a saxophonist. I think that's how you say it. He plays saxophone, but a composer. So one who writes for classical music, but also plays and writes for jazz. And so he had come to hear me do something at the Mostly Mozart Festival years ago. And since his relationship with Opera Philadelphia, they were talking about him writing an opera. And he said, well, I just heard this guy, Lawrence Brownlee, who sings, you know, he was singing Mozart, but his voice moves very well. I think a great way to merge jazz and opera would be to write about the life of Charlie Parker. And so it came from the support of the side of Opera Philadelphia, the idea with Daniel Schneider, and me saying I wanted to be a part of it. And so it was a tremendous honor for me to take on that character, such an iconic figure that I think is really important to the whole music canon. I think he's just a giant figure in the world of bebop and just the world of music at large. And so doing that was just a great experience for me. And I am a big supporter and advocate of new works. And so it was great to be a part of that.
So a couple of points you raised. Corrado Riveras is a wonderful conductor. I intend to have him on this program one week. He is from Bergamo, and therefore the hometown of Donizetti, and a great Donizetti specialist. You and I will actually talk about opera on this conversation, I promise. But he also is very active at Opera Philadelphia. This is a company people don't always know. The general director is named David Devan, and he and Corrado have created something very special, the O Festival, whether it's O 17, 18, 19, I hope there'll be an O 20, in which they really create this concentration for about 10 days in September, where you have, quote, traditional opera, lots of new works, opera singers such as Stephanie Blythe or Patricia Rosset doing cabaret and non-traditional operatic repertory. And it's really the place to be. And I commend it to people to look up past stuff, but also to kind of carve out that period in September to spend a long weekend in Philadelphia or weekdays and go to all of these works. It's very exciting. So that's just a little pitch for Philadelphia.
Well, you know, I'm an artistic advisor at Opera Philadelphia.
I did not know. Okay.
I am an artistic advisor, and I've been involved with the company now for the last 3 years officially. And, you know, I talked to David Devan the other day, and we will be extending that. So I'll be going forward, you know, into the future with that company. But it is a company that is very close to my heart. It is a company that believes in, you know, doing new works. They've kind of carved out their niche. You know, they're right in between New York and Washington, D.C. And so to try to contend doing the same types of things that these other organizations are doing, I think, you know, they felt that they can really focus in on some traditional opera, which they do very well, but also, you know, going outside of the box and really trying to do some things that are inventive. And I think they've been genius in doing this festival, which has brought in so many people. It's been a place that young artists specifically have gotten a chance to spread their wings and show their stuff. And so I support that company fully because I love what they're doing, and I'm happy to be, you know, officially attached to that company.
So something you said in passing triggered a thought that I've been wanting to ask a person of African descent for at least 20 years.
Yes.
And I've never asked the question. It's delicate, but you and I are friends, and I know you'll give me your sincere opinion. The United States Postal Service does a series of stamps they call Black Heritage. And it's been going for a very long time. And while I certainly support the concept of bringing persons of African descent to honor on postage stamps, which in America is kind of like a monument, a statue, and so on. And I believe in that profoundly. But Ella Fitzgerald is one of my patron saints. She died about a week before my father did. And frankly, once she died, he gave out. because when he went to the hospital, he brought very few pieces of music, a little Ravel, a little Debussy, and Ella Fitzgerald.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he listened to at the very end. And when a few years later they came out with a stamp for Ella Fitzgerald, it said Black Heritage. And
Mm-hmm.
many great people since then, most recently the wonderful journalist Gwen Ifill, it says
Mm-hmm.
Black Heritage. And I'm of the feeling, and disagree with me if you want to, that we see on the image that they're Black. I would rather see great musicians, great journalists, because then everyone who looks at the stamp when it comes in the mail does not see them as a Black person, but as a
Mm-hmm.
great musician, a great journalist, a great scientist, whatever. One day in the far future, when we have Barack Obama, I don't want it to say Black Heritage. I want it to
Mm-hmm.
say Barack Obama, which is all we, in my view, all we need.
Yeah.
Am I misguided on this?
I am 100,000% in agreement with you, because Ella Fitzgerald, I have to say, also is one of my two most favorite singers ever. So
Who's
I'd
the
say that all the time.
Who's the
She's,
other?
for me, yeah, Mel Torme is one of them.
Okay.
The two of them together. I mean, I love many singers, and of course, I love Pavarotti and Wunderlich, but there's something about Ella that's just indescribable for me. So I love her. And you also mentioned Gwen Ifill. I had the great honor of singing at her memorial service when she passed away a few years back. I agree. When I talked about Charlie Parker before, he's an American treasure, not
Yes.
a Black treasure.
Yes.
Ella Fitzgerald was an American treasure. Arthur Ashe, an American treasure. Barack Obama, when he, now and when he's no longer here, an American treasure. And so it's been this thing that when you realize that Black people don't have control of these organizations that, make stamps and make these certain things, they put this label on, perhaps with the lack of awareness that it probably can be divisive, and I think we'd be much better served when we get to the level of equality, that we don't look at people in Black and white. We can acknowledge that they are, of course. You look at me right now, you know that I am a man of darker complexion. I'm Black, but it doesn't need to be said. It doesn't need to, we don't need to point that out to try to categorize it in a sense. I think we should appreciate them for their efforts, for their successes, what their contributions have been to society. And this would be the better way to go. But I'm in agreement with you that we shouldn't label them in that way.
It has troubled me for a long time, because
Mm-hmm.
to me, if someone looked at the Ella Fitzgerald stamp or the Gwen Ifill or many others, they were being reminded that their quote achievement was being Black.
Mm-hmm.
When in fact, that's a part of who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And their achievement is in whatever field they were in. And that I want them on the same playing field as white, yellow, whatever the skin color, ethnicity, I don't care. But I want greatest singers in the world ever, that be the Ella Fitzgerald stamp.
Yeah.
And
You don't need to say greatest Black singer. Yeah.
No, greatest singer.
Yes.
Greatest singer.
Yes, I agree. I agree.
I mean, Joan Sutherland.
Yes. Yeah, it's one of the things, I have to say this, one of the things I've been doing lately, and people may have seen this on social media, is I've been trying to educate myself, and I've been actually hosting book discussions and things like that.
That was the next thing I wanted to get to. Your book club.
So I mean, I don't want to. So please, let's go into it. And I want to jump the gun. I don't want to jump it.
Well, I did want to ask you one thing before we get to the book club. Cycles of My Being.
Yes.
Which was just wonderful. Does not fully comprehend everything that it was. Because wonderful it certainly was. Special is another word. Moving, meaningful, thought-provoking. The music by Tyshawn Story, correct me if I pronounce it wrong. Lyrics. Sorry, Terrence Hayes, the lyrics, but a huge influence of Lawrence Brownlee in terms of making this happen. Would you tell our listeners about it?
So Cycles of My Being came about years ago when it seemed that we were turning on the TV every day. And that's when we were hearing about Trayvon Martin and hearing about some of these other people. And I've always thought that after a certain point, you can use your music as a platform. You know, the cachet that you've built up, you can kind of begin to talk about subjects that are important to you. And so as I was preparing or curating actually a recital tour where I was going to do Dichteli, but I wanted something to be the second half of it. And so I said, wouldn't it be great as the story of Dichteli, but if we could have a story that talked about the plight of Black men in America? And so what I wanted to do is to bring together, a collection of ideas from different sources, which is why I wanted to have a Black composer who could hopefully really capture or identify in his music the pain and the angst and all the things we feel, the elation and the joy as well, and the hope, and have him have that part of it, but also a poet lyricist in the writings of Terrence Hayes that could also bring together the ideas. And so I also wrote probably about 30% of it as well. Some of the lyrics and titles of my being are my own works. And so, but us to bring together these things so we can take control of the discussion and be able to put this in front of people so they could hopefully understand a little bit of what it is we go through on a day-to-day basis as a Black man. I know my reality is different than yours, Fred. I know it's different than someone who's blonde hair and blue eye. I wake up with a knowing that my day might be harder. And maybe I won't feel this on a day-to-day basis, but I'm always cognizant that in this society, it is a white supremacist society. And so for me to go and use my art has been meaningful for me. And I've taken cycles of my being from Provo, Utah, which is 99.9% Caucasian, largely, probably 99.9% conservative. It's where, they have BYU, which is, the Mormon, Brigham Young University. And so having the opportunity to present it there and also New York City has gotten this in front of a lot of people. And so this was a passion project and something that's very close to my heart. And people are eager to hear this in the future as well. So we hope to continue performing this. But you mentioned some things as far as like understanding. You said special, but I would also say abstract. And that was by design. The music wasn't necessarily one that falls in every moment, that falls in your ears in a pleasant way. But that was by design. Some Tyson said he didn't want people to feel comfortable listening to it. And it was difficult for me to sing. The way it's written is absolutely difficult. And so that was all part of the planning. But one of the pieces that, one of the things that I want to continue to do and to just use my little footprint on society or in this world to kind of like speak to these things that really can be troubling to all of us.
Is it recorded or does it exist on YouTube in any way?
It hasn't been recorded yet. There have been some excerpts, I think, in a few places. But part of the plan that we have now with some of the work I'm doing in the future is to try and record it. And it exists in two forms. It's in the small chamber group form, and then it's just myself and pianist. And so I've done it with Myra Huang, the brilliant pianist. I've done it with her many, many times. I've done it with her every time that I haven't done it with the small group. And we've only done it with the small group 2 times. That was in the debut in Philadelphia and then at Carnegie Hall. So,
which is where I heard you, at Zankel Hall at Carnegie Hall.
Yes.
The book club. Larry's book club. Oprah's book club was not enough. You had to create your own.
Well, the book club grew out of so many people writing me now. And of course, as we talk about the recent events in the media, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, so many of my friends, of course, most egregiously and most recently, George Floyd, everyone's reaching out to me. Those who would call themselves allies, have reached out to me and said, how can I be better? How can I do better? What can I do to show that I'm an ally and this is terrible? And to try to show solidarity. And I've challenged those people to move beyond the convenience of allyship right now. It's very easy to change your status on Facebook and put one of the black screens for a day. It's easy for you to like someone who's speaking out against, police brutality. It's easy to do that. I said, why don't you educate yourselves? And so I dedicated an existing book club that I used to run several summers ago, and I said I would rename it to the Book Club of 2020, which COVID, definitely makes people sit at home and they have the time to just sit and educate themselves. And so we read a book that's already called White Fragility by an author named Robin DiAngelo, and we're currently reading a book called White Rage by Dr. Carol Anderson. And these books are challenging for a lot of people. I'm in the process of reading White Rage right now, and what we have been told in our educational system about certain figures in history is not accurate, to say the least. It's not accurate. And when you think of, I don't want to name people right now, but many of our presidents of the past who have been lauded as, on the side of equality, that is the absolute opposite of what they really wanted, and how these people, the political and economic motivations of their actions were driving them to do certain things as well. But this is a place where we have engagement almost every day, and we're posting videos and having discussion about racism, about pervasive racism, systemic racism, just the interactions between whites and blacks. And so I've had several messages from people privately that thank me because they never had the opportunity. And some of these people have told me things like, you know what, I've never really had a black friend. This is different than someone who's passing by or you work in the same office. I've never really had a black friend. I don't know how to, and so this is the opportunity that we can have this engagement to kind of discuss racism, the raw and just unfiltered conversations that needed to have happened many years ago, but we're having them now. So I'm very, very proud of this and looking forward to a book discussion we're going to have a week from Saturday.
Good. Should we talk about opera?
What's that?
You gave me a list of music that's on IDAGIO. I tinkered with it just a little bit because a couple of the selections were not on IDAGIO, but I picked the same artist. Cecilia Bartley and James Levine are recording La Danza, in which they do Rossini, Bellini, Donizetti. So this is the mother lode of bel canto, which is your ballpark. It's what Larry Brownlee does in a way that very few other human beings do in the world. Wow. Talk about bel canto.
That's kind of you.
Well, it's true. And I'm an expert. Larry, if you Google opera expert in the whole world, you get Fred Plotkin. So I know about this stuff, and you are one of a handful, maybe 10 or 20 in the world who can do this stuff. Never mind the Pittsburgh Steelers or the Cleveland Browns or any of the. This is the really hard stuff. And you mentioned Corrado Rivera as the conductor at Philadelphia, but also in Bergamo. Talk to me, please, number one, briefly about what this is, but number two, the different approaches that you take to Rossini, Bellini, and Donizetti.
Well,
if you
and I know, everybody knows he's beautiful singing, but I think bel canto is really about the expressivity. And of course, the rulas and the melismas and the coloratura is just a tool to express yourself better, to highlight the words, to really center in on an emotion. And so, as you mentioned, I picked Cecilia Bartoli, who for me is I've had the great pleasure, the great fortune of working with her several times. And I call her a friend and a colleague of mine. Every time I listen to her sing, I learn because she's always trying to express, and she's always trying to really bring something new out of it. And I remember being on stage the first time we were doing Le Contori at Zurich Opera, maybe 7 or 8 years ago. And I just remember sitting there just thinking, she is incredible. And she's done everything she needs to do in this business but she still is in pursuit of the highest level of artistry. And I saw her tinkering with the lines and saying, how can I do this a little bit better? Or, just trying to work through certain things. So that inspired me so much. So bel canto, as you said, it's something that I think is personal. And I'm not going to do it the same way as Cecilia. I'm not going to do it the same way as Juan Diego Flores. I'm not going to do it the way as, Sam Raimi or Marilyn Horne or Joyce DiDonato, because you have your artistic license and you have your place to be expressive in the way your emotions or the way to show your strengths, I think, is built in as a bel canto artist, that you can be expressive in your own way. So I always try to do it from that standpoint of doing it how I would do it within the confines of what the composer wrote.
Are there approaches that are different or maybe not to Rossini, Bellini, and Donizetti with each composer, or do you begin in the same place as an artist?
Well, I mean, there are differences. And of course, Rossini is different than Donizetti, is different than Bellini. And so it's just not like umbrella, all the same thing. And some people, they are better at Donizetti. People talk about that the most important thing in Donizetti is the legato. The most important thing in Rossini may be the coloratura. The most important thing in Bellini may be the high, the high tessitura and some of the high notes and how you approach them, So they all have their varying characteristics. And just as an artist, I think I always just try to be intelligent, try to understand the style, and try to make it my own and try not to copy someone else. And so I believe in living with the piece. I believe in making it your own. Just as when you go to some of these, some of these opera houses and you try on a costume, it may fit 90%, but then you have to have it altered. You have to make the thing work for you. And I think because all these pieces were normally written for some specific voice, you just have to make it work for you. And that's what I always try to do as an artist.
Other artists you listed Fritz Wunderlich and Dichterliebe, and you were not the first person on this series to list that recording, by the way. Yes. That and Carlos Kleiber's Beethoven's Seventh are the two that get the most mentions of all. And you spoke about it before in having done that on a double bill with Cycles of My Being. So I'm going to move on. Giuseppe De Stefano seems to be a favorite. I know that he was Pavarotti's favorite.
Yes.
What is it about Giuseppe Di Stefano?
Well, Di Stefano had about a 7 or 8 year career, and the thing
and many comebacks.
Yeah, many comebacks. But the thing about him, I think he probably sang with his heart more than he sang with his head, and he just was full throttle. He gave everything, and I love that. I love that passion. I love that approach to singing. My teacher in the past, I said, you probably want to sing with your head and not so much with your heart, because from a technical standpoint, you have to you have to understand that this is a very fragile instrument. And so, but the passion that you hear, and I was listening to the recording, the Puritani. I was listening to it just a short minute ago, just to refresh my memory. And I listened to that many, many times. It's just, when he gets into Act 3, he sings with so much fervor and so much passion and so much, I
don't think there's a better bit of music than Vieni fra queste braccia.
With him and Callas.
And you sing it beautifully, and he did, and Luciano and Alfredo Kraus, when a tenor can do that, it's just so, I'm getting goosebumps. It's so incredibly thrilling to hear, which leads me to, when I'm always asked, who's your favorite of the 3 tenors, Domingo, Pavarotti, or Carreras, I always answer Alfredo Kraus. Number 1, to sidestep the question. But number 2, because no tenor, let's start with that, has given me more pleasure than Alfredo Kraus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There was no one like him.
Yeah.
And many people may not know him. He was from the Canary Islands. He had a Austrian father, a Spanish mother. He was not traditionally handsome, but he was such a handsome man on the stage.
Gentle uomo, yes.
And when he was 65, he could still sing the Duke of Mantua, not only musically, but you could believe that any woman would just fall right over for him. because of what he projected as an aura.
Yeah.
Gorgeous singing. He was what was known, and I'm going to ask you to define it if you want, as a tenore di grazia, tenor of grace. But there's so much more to that. How would you define that in terms of Alfredo Kraus?
So, I mean, you have to know that I'm a huge fan of Alfredo Kraus, and we share the same birthday, November 24th. Yeah, he was 1927 and I was 1972. So even the numbers are the same. They just turned around and, oh my gosh. But tenor of elegance, tenor of grace, and just his Pearl Fishers, for me, there isn't a better one, and so many of the things when you talk about, I have his recording of The Daughter of the Regiment, and I have other recordings of him when he sings E la solita storia del pastore. Sheer musicality and, yes, elegance and grace. And so a man of the theater. And as you said, it is believable because he wasn't necessarily, I mean, he wasn't an unattractive guy, but he wasn't what you would call a heartthrob. But his aura, his persona made you believe that you were just looking or listening to a leading man because he exuded that in his presence. So I am the hugest fan of Alfredo Kraus. So you're not alone in that. I love Kraus.
I know. I commend him to people who may not know him. Just on IDAGIO, go search all the Alfredo Kraus. The singing was glorious. One of the great opera moments in my life. Many involved him. I happened to be at the performance that turned out to be his last performance.
Oh, really?
He developed a cancer very quickly, and we didn't know. And then it was in Berlin, and it was Werther with Veselina Kazarova at the opera in West Berlin, the Deutsche Oper. And the audience went wild. You would never have known that this man was unaware that he was ill with cancer and would die soon thereafter. The singing and the way he partnered Veselina was amazing. I remember when I worked at the Met and we did our Centennial Gala, he and Catherine Malfitano sang from Romeo and Juliet, big age difference, the two of them magnificent singers. The audience was just gasping for air because of the beauty of that singing. That's viewable on YouTube, that little segment of Kraus and Malfitano. Finally, you mentioned a classic, Donizetti's La Fille du Régiment, Richard Bonning conducting his wife, Joan Sutherland, Luciano Pavarotti, Spiro Malus, I believe her Helen Sinclair, I forget her first name, but Ms. Sinclair. And why Luciano, Joan, Donizetti, why La Fille du Régiment? And you have
as a bel canto tenor, everybody was, when I was studying the high C's of A Mes Amis, that was Pavarotti. And I bought, that's one of the CD is over there somewhere. It's somewhere in the back there, but I wore that CD out and I listened to it many times. Just her and him. And Daughter of the Regiment is really more about her than him. Of course, he has the two moments, A Mes Amis, he has the duet, and he has, of course, this Pour me rapprocher, that one as well. But it is a tour de force for Marie. And so that's where I really got to know Joan Sutherland, because as a young tenor, you kind of focus in on just the tenors, and listening to that, having it on in the house, and not really just paying attention, but just having it, you begin to know all these other things. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what an incredible artist she was. But I have to be honest and say that it was because I had to have on at my command the opportunity to play A Mes Amis by Pavarotti over and over and over again. That's why I bought that CD.
Joan, who I knew well, I'm honored to work with her a lot. There's no better colleague in the world than Joan Sutherland, and her husband, Richard Bonning, was incredibly funny. And she knew that at the latter stage of her career, she looked like the grandmother of the regiment, but never hammed it up. What was so funny on the stage, her comic timing was incredible. And she would go around with a big drum and beat the drum at the right moment and duel with the orchestra and criticize her husband in the pit with the drumstick, but never hamminess, but just the most remarkable timing that she brought to her music and her performing. We need to close this up. As they say in the opera, il faut partir, hélas, we must go, sadly. But just a mention of something that we began with almost, we were talking about the fact that artists are on the road constantly and detached from their families. The Bonnings were different. They have a son who lives in Australia, where they were from. Richard Bonning is still alive and lives in Switzerland. But with the Bonnings, unlike any other couple or theatrical couple I knew, late in a run, if they were doing 6 or 7 performances at the Met, by the 5th, they were itching to be on the road again. Not necessarily to go home to Switzerland or Australia, though they like that, but to get on to the next gig, the next project, the next theater, the next logical family. And they built these families everywhere, and they had their very close circle, and then they had their larger colleague group. And I used to go, Richard Bonning liked to go to antique shops and go and look at musical scores and so on. Joan Sutherland liked to go to a department store we no longer have called Gimbel's, because she liked American fitted sheets. And she would arrive with measurements for beds in Australia and Switzerland and their flat in London. And she would buy sheets like crazy. And from the store knew that this was Joan Sutherland. And Miss Sutherland, don't you want anything? Would you like blankets? Would you like pillows? Would you like, no, just sheets. I bring them to all my friends all over the world that love American sheets. And I would come out carrying bags and bags of fitted and folding sheets. Very funny, very humane, very honest, very dear, just like you, Lawrence Brownlee.
Well, thank you. Very,
It's been a pleasure to have you, to see you again. Keep up all the good things you're doing. We all follow you. Friends who are listening, follow him in the book club and on social media and on performances he's doing. Just Google Lawrence Brownlee. You're Lawrence in the opera world. And thank you for all that you do.
Thank you, Fred. It's always nice to be with you, my friend.
Great to see you, and I hope to see you live and hear you live very soon. Take care.